Thank you all so very much. It's a privilege and an honor to be here with you today. So, on the journey that you just watched, it was a big day. I had just spent time with the chairman of Holiday Inn Worldwide. I was invited to go fly for the first time in a corporate jet and go play a round of golf and interview this guy, and it was a super stellar day. And I just landed back in Atlanta, Georgia, where he was, and shook hands and said goodbye. And I jumped in my Volkswagen bus, and I had my dog sitting in the front seat with his head sticking out the window and driving down the road. And all of a sudden, I pulled up to a stoplight, and right pulling up next to me is a red 308 Ferrari, GTS Ferrari, you know, the one that Magnum PI used to drive, those red Ferraris. And so it just hit me, and I rolled down the window, and I leaned over, and I said, "Hey, you want to race?" And the guy just looked at me and laughed and drove off. And so I was feeling really good about the journey, what was happening. So I kind of, thank God we were just in, regular traffic so I could keep up with him. And he pulled off into a gas station to fix a tire. And so I pulled off with him, and I grabbed my photo album, and I waited for the right moment, and I walked up to this guy, and I said, "Excuse me, my name's Eric Saperston, and I'm traveling around the country, and I'm calling up some of the most powerful people in the world and taking them out for coffee. And, here's a photo album. Here's the people I've met with President Jimmy Carter, and I met with Jerry Garcia, and I met with some amazing people. And I'd really like to take you out for a cup of coffee." Now, the journey that I've been on has not been about success. It's really been about people who get up in the morning excited and go to bed fulfilled. And I've met with environmental activists, and I've met with Volkswagen mechanics, and I've met with all kinds of people. But I've never really, I saw your Ferrari, and I'm feeling good, and it feels like, you must have a pretty amazing story, so can I take you out for a cup of coffee? And the guy looked at me and he said, "I appreciate your request, but I'm not interested." And I said, "Look, I really appreciate your humility, but I'm sure you've got a great story, and I just, just a cup of coffee and 15 minutes of your time." He said, "Look, I appreciate your tenacity, but I'm really not the guy you're looking for." I said, "But how do you know that? I'd like to meet you." He said, "Look, I appreciate your request, but this isn't even my car." and I said, "Well, whose car? What's going on?" He said, "Well, I'm the head of security for the guy that owns the car, and I'm taking it out today." I said, Well, whose car is it?" He said, "Well, if I told you, I wouldn't be a very good head of security." No, would I? And I said, I appreciate that, but I just, you can see who I've met, and I've met all these amazing people, and please tell me." And after a while, I talked to him, and he finally disclosed to me who his boss was. And it turned out to be this guy, John Portman, who was a world-renowned architect. And he's a famous, very amazing man. And one of his big claim to fame is actually created here in New York City, where he was walking the streets of New York, and he had a vision. And when you're in New York City and you're walking the streets with all this concrete and jackhammers and honking of horns, and he said, if you walk in, if you walk into a building, what would you want more than anything in the world? And he said, "You'd want to breathe." And so he had a vision which he called Lungs for the City. And he was the one that first created the atrium in the hotels, with the big, huge pool and waterfalls. And it was a revolutionary idea because back then, hotels, they were just you walk in and there was the roof and then floors because you want to maximize, your space. But he thought, we can open that and make it more expansive and create that feeling of breath. And so he did that, and it revolutionized the hotel business, and he's done many amazing things. And so I convinced this guy, Boone, who was the head of security, to let me call his assistant. And just like all things on the journey, I would have to, I'd call from the side of a road at a payphone, and I would get on the phone, and I would call up, and I would say, "Hi, my name's Eric Saperston. Hold on a second," and I'd let a semi or some truck go by so they knew that I was on this. And I'd say, "My name's Eric Saperston, and I'm traveling around the country, and I'm calling up some of the most powerful people in the world, and I'm taking them out for a cup of coffee to find out the values they live by, the struggles they've endured, and what advice and counsel they would give to me and my generation to better prepare ourselves for the road ahead. And I'm selling grilled cheese sandwiches, sexy kind, grilled cheese sandwiches, off my stove to raise money, and I've made enough money where I can treat you to a cup of coffee, but if you order anything else on the menu, you're on your own. And if they chuckled like that, I knew I had them, and it took many phone calls to get access to some of the most powerful people on the planet. But I finally got access to this guy, John Portman, and we met in Atlanta at this Peachtree Center, which is what he built, and it's this beautiful area. And we sat down and had a cup of coffee, and we're talking, and I'm interviewing about his life and whatnot. And he goes, "Excuse me," and he gets up and goes and leaves me. And I'm sitting there for 20 minutes, and there was a moment there where I wasn't sure if he was actually gone or coming back, but I sat there and I was patient, and then all of a sudden he reappears, and unbeknownst to me, he went into a bookstore and he bought me a book. And he sat down and he said, "I want to give you this book." And the book was a book about Joseph Campbell, who wrote a book, wrote many books, but Joseph Campbell was Power of Myth and Hero of a Thousand Faces. He's the gentleman that coined the phrase, "Follow your bliss." You might have heard of that. And so he gives me this book and writes in the inscription, "An open life is yours if you have the courage." That book and what he wrote changed the trajectory of my life. And today, what I'd like to talk about is a few things that might help you on your journey as it relates to courage. Number one, I know you all are super smart and are up to big things in your world, and so let me ask you all, and just shout it out. What do you think separates those who achieve from those who do not? Action, curiosity, persistence, confidence, courage, passion, bravery, ambition. All great answers, and all part of the soup that makes it happen. But I can tell you, and I can share with you, and I invite you to consider, that after spending 4 years on the road, shooting 500 hours of footage and interviewing over 200 of the most extraordinary people on the planet, what I've discovered after meeting all these people is what separates those who achieve greatness from those who do not is in direct proportion to one's ability to ask others for help. Now, why is that riveting? Why is it that I talk to an entire audience of people and not one person raised their hands? "Dude, ask for help." The reason why is that we are a culture addicted to looking good. And that we have taught everyone to fake it till you make it, never let them see you sweat, and only raise your hand when you're sure. Yet, what's fascinating about that is that if one is willing to admit, I believe that the quickest way to have people respect what it is that you know in life is to admit what you don't know. If you're willing to be humble. All you have to do is figure out what the what is. What the what is. What is it that you're up to? What do you want to create? What are you endeavoring to do? If you can figure out what the what is, then go seek wise people and then let them help you with the how. My whole journey was based on an old Chinese proverb, to know the road ahead, ask those coming back. It works. You all are up to big games in your life. Seek out wise people and get directions. They've done many things. It doesn't mean that you can't follow your own unique path, because I'm all about it. Follow your own unique journey, but seek out wise people because they're helpful and they want to help. So, number one, an open life is yours if you have the courage to ask for help. When I was on the journey and traveling and meeting all these amazing people, when I was on the road, I came across a word called serendipity. Beautiful word. I'd heard it before, but I really didn't digest it until I was on the road. The literal definition of serendipity is having an aptitude for making desirable discoveries by accident. To having the aptitude for making desirable discoveries by accident. Let me ask you all, how do you significantly increase your odds of making desirable discoveries by accident? What is it? Kindness. What's that? Make more accidents. Talk to as many people as you can.
Do things you don't know how to do.
Do things you don't know how to do. All great answers again. I invite you to consider that the best way to increase your odds of making desirable discoveries by accident is to live in wonder. To live in the awe, the rapture, the marvel, and astonishment. That's why people love going on holidays. Because when you're on holiday, you're outside of your comfort zone. You're totally living on the edge. And when you're living on the edge, all your senses are awake, right? It's like brand new world. It's like, this is the best coffee I've ever had. I mean, you're totally like in the moment. When you're in the moment, like, it's like your sense of smell, taste, touch, everything that you have in your life, you're in the power of now. And when you're in the power of now, you are paying attention. And when you're paying attention, you can hear a twig branch snap, and all of a sudden, you're called to something. Or you can overhear a conversation, and when you overhear a conversation, then you hear words, and then you're drawn to it. Or in my case, you notice a red Ferrari, and you choose to follow it. When you're living in the awe and the rapture and the marvel, and you're following this magical journey, and you trust completely the process, when you're living in wonder, you significantly increase your odds of serendipity because you're awake. So, number 2, an open life is yours if you have the courage to live in wonder. And 3, let me ask you this. Where does possibility live? In the unknown. Where else? In your mind. Where else? In your willingness to what? Try. Where else? Imagination. All great answers. But I invite you to consider this. That possibility only lives in language. The best ideas that you have will come in your heart, will come in your head. You will have these ideas, but until you actually have the courage to speak your possibility into the world, it does not exist. And one of the things that prevents people from speaking their possibility into the world is that nobody wants to be judged or misunderstood or held accountable, because once you say it, then people are going to pay attention to you. And then what happens if what you said doesn't come to fruition? Then you look like a fool. And nobody wants to appear foolish, but for me, too late. I stood out there on the side of the road, and as I said earlier, how I funded my journey is I would pull my bus into a rest stop. I'd grab the parking stall closest to the bathroom. I'd put out my 2-burner green Coleman camping stove, and I would sell Sexy Kind grilled cheese sandwiches made with love for $1 off my Coleman stove. People would walk up to me like a dog does when they're confused. They go, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm traveling around the country calling up the most powerful people in the world and taking them out for a cup of coffee. They go, well, have you met anybody yet? No, not yet, but I kept speaking my possibility into existence. And what would happen is as I told people, all of a sudden people would go, oh my gosh, that's pretty cool. But I had to keep speaking it and speaking it. Somebody else would walk up to me and go, well, you're making you said you're going to make a movie. Did you go to film school? Do you know how to make a movie? I said, no, not yet. But I was willing to speak my possibility into the world and kept speaking it into the world. Now flash forward several years later, and now I'm back here in New York City. My movie is selling out in theaters across the country. I'm a guest on the Today Show, and those same people walked up to me and go, dude, believed in you all the time. But you have to be willing to speak your possibility into the world and have the courage. So an open life is yours if you have the courage to speak your possibility into the world. So I want to thank you all. I tip my hat, I raise my glasses, and I bow respectfully to who you are and who you're being in the world. I thank you for having the courage to be amazing. I thank you for having the courage to trust your instincts. I thank you for being on the hero's journey and being of service. I thank you for having the courage to ask for help. I thank you for having the courage to live in wonder. And I thank you for having the courage to speak your possibility into the world. As George Bernard Shaw said, this is the great joy of life. being used up by a purpose recognized by yourself as a mighty one, being a force of nature instead of a feverish, selfish little clod of ailments and grievances complaining that the world will not devote itself to making you happy. I'm of the opinion that my life belongs to the community, and as long as I live, I will do for it what I can. For the harder I work, the more I live. I rejoice in life for its own sake. Life is no brief candle to me. It is sort of a splendid torch which I have hold of for the moment, and I want it to burn as brightly as possible before handing it off to future generations. It is certainly true for me. I trust it is for you, and so it is. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thanks.